Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for joining ANI. Let's get straight to this. President Trump says that talks are active. Tehran calls it fake news. You've really worked on back channel diplomacy at the highest levels. What is actually happening here? Are both sides even in the same conversation?
Well, I think, as best one can tell, I think Trump has reached out through intermediaries to see if there's some kind of deal that can be cut with the regime in Tehran, perhaps through Turkey, through Pakistan, perhaps others. And all we know for sure is that Iran denies that anything is going on, although they say they have received notes. I just find it hard to believe, whatever conversations there have been, that anybody is anywhere close to agreement. The regime of the Ayatollahs see this attack as existential for them. Uh, it's not clear what Trump's objective is. I mean, I know what I think it should be. I think it should be regime change, but I'm not sure that's his objective. And I think Trump is so transactional that there's always a risk that he would look for some way to declare victory and get out. And at this point, that has to mean opening the Strait of Hormuz. So we will know, I think, within a few days whether there's any serious prospect of that or whether this whole approach Trump took Monday morning before the U.S. markets opened was more for preventative measures to stop a run on the stock market.
Just to follow up on what you just said about Trump's intention, do you think that this is really about diplomacy, or is it just a cover up for President Trump? For him to reposition his assets, buying time to get boots on ground, calming the markets, like you just said. What's the real driver here for President Trump?
Well, it could be all of those things. When we say he's transactional, it means that he doesn't think strategically. He doesn't even do policy the way most people understand that. Every day is a new day, every decision's a new decision. He could see Monday morning, Washington time, that the Asian markets in the Nikkei in Japan, Shanghai average in China had gone down 3.5% during Monday their time. So fearing the opening of the New York markets in a couple of hours, he may have thought, I need to do something to buy time. That would be one reason. And at the same time, see if the Iranians really have any interest in having discussions. So he has bought himself some time until Friday. The test of whether these discussions were ever realistic, we'll see in a few days.
Right. Just this morning, Trump and Modi just spoke to each other. What's India's play in this crisis, and what did each side actually get from that call? What is your perspective?
Well, it's pretty clear, I think, that from Modi's point of view, continuing to get oil from Iran is something he's interested in. And two Indian ships, I believe, made it through the Strait of Hormuz this morning. Um, but that's providing revenue to Iran, which enables their war machine to continue. So I'm sure they had a conversation about other alternative places to buy oil rather than Iran. I think the U.S. should blockade the strait and prevent Iranian ships carrying Iranian oil from getting in or out. I mean, if our friends, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, others can't sell oil because of Iran, I don't see any reason to allow Iran to profit off the war.
Right. Now, Trump says that the talks are underway with senior Iranian figures. Tehran's own parliament denies that. And then you have the third here, which is the Israelis. It has its own red lines. It has its own clock. If Washington moves towards a deal that keeps this regime alive without a regime change, that is, does Israel fall in line, or does it act?
Well, I think their preference is to continue to push for regime change, but as a number of Israelis have said to me, Trump started the war, Trump will end the war. It's just that simple from Israel's point of view. There is, however, another new development reported this morning that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, in calls in the past few days with Trump, has urged him to continue the war to overthrow the regime because he thinks that there's not going to be stability in the Gulf as long as that regime is there. And he's very worried that if a wounded regime is left, it will go back to terrorism, it will go back to rebuilding its nuclear program, and it will always be a threat to the Strait of Hormuz. So even though the Saudis were not sort of on board originally, I don't think, with Trump's attack, they see the situation, they see the logic of the situation now, meaning that having once started it, he has to succeed. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. A badly wounded regime, I think, is going to be even harder to deal with, maybe less capabilities for a while, but even more ideological and hardline than the one that was replaced.
Now, there is a strong buzz that the US and the Iranians will meet in Islamabad. Let's just zoom out a little bit and go back to Tulsi Gabbard's comments recently calling Pakistan's missile a direct threat to the United States. Trump, on the other hand, calls Munir his favorite field marshal. How do you square all of that? What really is US's Pakistan strategy? And
You know,
directly, if talks collapse, is Pakistan territory on the table for a US operation against Iran?
well, I think Trump sees international relations through a personal prism. He thinks if he has good relations with a foreign leader, then the U.S. has good state-to-state relations with that country. So he thinks he's a friend of Vladimir Putin's. I don't think that's the way Putin sees Trump, but Trump thinks he and Putin are friends, and therefore he can get along with Russia. And my guess is he sees General Munir the same way. What Tulsi Gabbard was reporting, I think, was probably what her staff had sent to her, and she's certainly no expert on the subject, and she was just reading what their opinion was. I think I have to say I'm skeptical these talks are going to succeed, and therefore, if they do fail, I don't think Trump will blame Munir for that. And in fact, I don't think he should, because I don't think whether it's Turkey or Pakistan or even if it were Oman or Qatar, I mean, the intermediary here is not the problem. The problem is the regime in Tehran.
Right. Now, Trump has openly admitted that the U.S. underestimated Iran's response in the Gulf. Iranian forces hit multiple Gulf states, over these days. If this regime survives, how will the Gulf recalibrate towards Washington and towards Tehran?
Well, I think, as I mentioned about the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, I think it really is clear to most of the oil-producing monarchies that Iran is a threat to them as much as it is to Israel, and that's why the prospect of regime change is very attractive to them. Look, when the Shah was the ruler of Iran, they were members of OPEC together. They were obviously competitors. There long-standing splits between the Persian side of the Gulf and the Arab side of the Gulf, but they lived pretty much in peace. And it's this ideological regime of religious extremists in Tehran that's brought the trouble. If they could have another regime that wasn't run by the Ayatollahs, if it was a military government, if it was a representative government, whatever it might be, I think the Gulf states could live with it, and that they're not asking for, an emir of Iran. They whatever the people want, I think they would be happy to accept.
Right. Now, you've openly called for regime change in Iran for decades, not just, this when this crisis erupted. If these talks end with clerical regime still standing, like we talked before, maybe with some nuclear guardrails in place, is that a defeat for Trump? And be direct, can the US ever do a lasting deal with this regime?
Well, no, we can't do a lasting deal with the regime. That's why the argument is if you try and try and try and find you can't change a regime's behavior, a hostile regime's behavior, then you either have to accept that behavior will continue or you've got to try and change the regime. The idea that nuclear guardrails agreed by a regime under pressure are going to be followed is just delusional. They're going to go back to building their nuclear weapons program up again. It's been an objective of theirs for 3 or 4 decades. There's never been any evidence they've abandoned it. And if the regime isn't overthrown, it will be a defeat for Trump. He won't acknowledge that. He'll declare victory no matter what. But I think the Gulf countries would see that having launched this strike, Trump wasn't prepared to carry through on it.
Right. Very quickly, your closing remarks on this crisis.
Well, I think the world would be a better place if there were a replacement of the regime of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. I think that's the right objective. I can't say what Trump's objective is, but I hope because of Israeli, Saudi. I mean, it's you've got a very broad consensus of most of the other countries in the region that you're not going to have peace and stability in the Middle East, much less freedom from the nuclear threat or terrorism until that regime disappears.
On that note, thank you so much for talking to ANI, Ambassador Bolton. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador.
You like this video? Then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.